Chapter 5, Chapter 4, The Fighting Girl. Chapter 4, The Fighting Girl. The Church of Saint Eva had been established nearly 1,000 years ago. Before its coming, the world's religions had mostly consisted of worshipping various pagan spirits, the most popular of which was Loden, the dragon god. Historians attributed this to the dragon clan's weight in the world. Even when the Dark Dragon Empire had crumbled, the reunification of the Dark Dragon and Light Dragon factions had coincided with the union of the Dragon Clan and Wing Clan, actually increasing the overall authority of the Dragon Clan as a whole. When the entirety of the Dragon Clan vanished inexplicably from the earth, the power vacuum left behind had been filled by the Church of Saint Eva. It was only natural that people would have turned from Loden to a new faith, considering the circumstances, and apparently Saint Eva himself had seen that as well. In only a matter of years, the true God's teachings had spread across the globe. Why God had needed to wait for such an opportune moment to reveal himself to the world had always been something of a mystery to Ryu. He had always wondered if that portion of doctrine had been purposefully obscure, or if it was simply beyond his grasp. Regardless, the Church's mission had clearly succeeded. Today, they were only steps away from global devotion, their reach only exceeded by the mineral-mercantile empire that controlled global commerce. Even the Isle of Tunlan, so removed from the rest of humanity that their language didn't even use words, had given their consent for a chapel to be built. The only remaining holdouts were a few of the clans, the most prominent being the Wing clan, who were now militantly atheistic. It was widely considered to be only a matter of time before they conceded as well. Ryu had never exactly been the most devoted son of the Church. Few men in his line of work were. It tended to require a more cynical, practical attitude than the priests of Saint Eva favored, with little time for black and white morality or belief in absolutes. Even so, he and Bao had always had a certain feeling that kicked in when they had dodged the Sunday congregation for long enough, and it was time to make another visit. Despite his practical nature, Ryu had to admit that there was something about attending church that got to him, in a good way. When he listened to the sermons along with the rest of the congregation, it seemed to wash away all of his fears and worries, all of his conflicting emotions and troublesome urges, leaving him comfortably numb and at peace with the world. The priest's sermon seemed to lack any sense of time, but that wasn't a bad thing. It was like nothing else mattered outside of the church, and the people within it, all united for one purpose for just a few hours. Ray was there, of course. Ryu had seen him at the front of the congregation, and they had both nodded, but hadn't had a chance to talk before the sermon began. He had looked for Kat as well, but hadn't been able to locate her in the crowd. Once or twice, he thought he saw her hair, but was unable to get closer to verify that it was her. Rand was the opposite. The farm clansman would have been visible from a mile off, so the fact that Ryu couldn't find him meant he obviously hadn't come. Before he knew it, the priest had concluded the sermon. As the congregation scattered, chattering amongst themselves, Ryu saw Ray walking towards him, and inclined his head towards a now empty pew. The paladin followed him silently, and they sat at the far end, away from the milling crowd. "I'm glad to see you here," Ray said quietly. "To be honest, I wasn't sure if you would really come or not. I'd say I was offended, except I'm not, actually." Ryu chuckled. "I'll admit it, my attendance hasn't exactly been perfect in the past. I try not to let it go for too long without showing up, though. I just don't feel right, you know." "Of course," Ray agreed solemnly. "Saint Eva's hand cleanses the soul. It's natural to seek it out." He smiled suddenly. "But I'm guessing you've had enough doctrine already. It's been several days since we last spoke. How have they found you?" "Oh, you know how it goes." Ryu shrugged. "I'm not dead in a ditch somewhere, so I'm doing pretty good." "An interesting basis for determining luck," Ray replied after a moment. "I must say, I didn't expect to see you in the Colosseum the other day." He glanced at Ryu curiously. "What were you doing back there?" "Ranger business," Ryu told him bluntly. "Sorry, but I'd be in deep shit if I ran my mouth about it." Despite feeling the same odd sense of kinship around Ray that he did with Rand and Kat, he didn't feel like he knew him well enough to take the same chances. "What about you?" "Church business," Ray replied in the same offhand, but firm, tone. "Or so I'd like to say. But to be honest, the reason I asked was because there's something I've been worrying about." He closed his eyes, as if thinking about how to phrase his next sentence. "If you can't tell me what you were doing there, that's fine, but has something seemed off about the Colosseum to you?" "You know, funny thing about that." Ryu stared straight ahead. "Everybody who's been helping me out on this job has warned me about that place. An old merchant I ran into on the way in, this lumberjack up in the Tagwoods, and even a couple guys who actually work up there. They all say that things used to be good, but they're getting messy."
And it all leads back to August Conti.
He turned to look Ray in the eye.
This city's got an ugly wind blowing through it right now. A violent wind. And I'd bet 5 cents any day it's coming from the top. My own research has led me to a similar conclusion,
Ray agreed, no trace of lightness in his voice now.
August Conti, last descendant of the Colosseum's first owner, who financed its construction, a widower of advanced middle age with no heir. Widely known as first citizen of the city of Corsair, a close friend of the mayor. The power behind the throne, as it stands. And a long-time devotee of Saint Eva, known for financing the rebuilding of the church we stand in, and for making frequent donations afterwards. I get it,
Ryu said quietly.
You got sent here on business having to do with August, but what's been going on here has made you wonder about that same business. Exactly.
Ray closed his eyes.
You met him. I won't ask why, but... What did you make of him? Honestly.
Ryu did the same.
He belongs in a nut house. There's something wrong with his head. The problem is, in this city, he's untouchable by legal means. I had come to the same conclusion,
Ray agreed.
We of the Church of Saint Eva have access to channels of information that are unavailable to normal people. After I met with him, I asked some questions, and the responses I got worried me. Rumors only, and yet... The Joker Gang.
Ryu guessed.
Correct,
Ray said.
As well as certain shady wandering operations. Not what one expects of a devoted son of the church.
He opened his eyes again.
Thank you for your input. I'm guessing you would appreciate it if I didn't mention you officially. Definitely.
Ryu glanced up at the statue behind the altar, at the back of the hall, then back to Ray.
Look. Something's going to go down in the big fight tonight. Not sure what it's going to be, can't say why. But that's when it'll happen, and when it does, August will get involved. I'm guessing you weren't too interested in the fight. You might want to be there anyways. Up to you. Perhaps I shall, then,
Ray said speculatively, eyes narrowed.
August will be involved, you say. Will you? Ranger business.
Ryu started to stand sorry.
A friendly warning, then.
Ray put a hand on his shoulder, heavy and gauntlet.
Be very careful. I dislike him as much as you, to be honest, but August Conti is not a man to be lightly crossed in this city. As cliché as it is, neither am I.
Ryu looked him in the eye.
Here, or anywhere else. May Saint Eva be with you, Ray. That's normally my line.
Ray smiled, and despite his anger at the entire situation, Ryu had to as well.
And also with you, Ryu. If you need my aid in a manner that I can give it, come find me at my room at the Rat's Arms. Good luck, my friend.
It was noon when Ryu left the cathedral, leaving him with several hours to kill before it was time to report to the Colosseum. After getting some lunch, he drifted out of the city gates once again. A little fishing, a monster or two and some deep thinking seemed in order, too much fighting was out of the question, of course, but there was nothing wrong with a little warm-up. A school of Unagi and a couple of hungry snapdragons took care of the first two, but when he re-entered Corsair as the bells tolled 5, he still had no idea what he was going to do about August's plot. Still troubled, but out of time, he made his way north, to the Colosseum. The lines were long in front of the gate, of course. Once more, the guards were out in full force, carefully monitoring everything and making sure nobody tried to cut ahead, let alone get in without a ticket. The fights that periodically broke out in midline were ignored, though. Ryu crept along the side, conscious of the guards' eyes on him, and hoping their leader was who he thought it was.
Hey, Mr. Duri.
It was Eddie, the same guard who had led him in the previous day.
About time you showed up. Come on in.
As the crowd began to howl, unaware of who he was but incensed at seeing anybody get in so easily, the guards quickly surrounded Ryu and shoved him through the gates. Once he was inside, they quickly melted away, leaving him standing in the lobby with curious pedestrians looking him over.
Keep taking lefts to get to the dressing rooms,
Eddie called as the guards went back out.
Once you get there, though, it's the door on the right. The one on the left's your opponent's. Take my word for it, do not go in there. Right.
Ryu started walking to the left, then froze, as a thought struck him.
Hey, wait a second here.
After a moment, he kept going, slightly faster. Fortunately, the doors to the two locker rooms were unguarded, nobody else was around either. After a moment's hesitation, he set Baba's axe down next to his door, then knocked on the one on the left.
Hello? Anybody in here?
There was no response. Waiting a bit more, he pushed the door open and crept inside. The room was luxuriously decorated, though not nearly as much as August's office. There was not only a sitting table with chairs and a mirror, but an actual wardrobe against the wall next to the armor stand. It held what looked like a leather leotard, lightweight and allowing complete freedom of movement while still offering slight protection. What really got his attention was the weapon leaning next to it, though. At first glance a simple wooden staff, its ends had been carved to resemble the claw of some animal, with 3 sharpened points. Testing their sharpness, he winced as one drew blood.
This thing could do some damage,
he muttered, trying not to imagine what a throat jab would result in.
Glad you approve,
a familiar voice said lightly from the back door of the room. It was Kat, leaning casually against it, amusement and anger mixing in her eyes.
Hey, Kat.
Ryu turned to glance at her.
What are you doing in?
His eyes widened as, after far too long, the zenny finally dropped.
Oh, shit. So, you figured it out,
Kat commented, advancing on him.
Good for you. Now then, I think the big question is, in fact, what are you doing in here? A few answers come to mind, but I don't really like any of them. I do kind of like you, though, so why don't I give you a chance to come up with a better one, and we'll go from there.
Her smile was like a knife.
Babadari. Okay, listen.
Ryu held up his hand, mind racing, while he casually checked his dragon tear with the other. It was plain yellow, which stung a little, but at least it wasn't anything actually bad. All thoughts of the thief had left his mind, replaced by the more immediate concern of August.
We can talk about what exactly you and Rand were up to another day. Right now, we've got bigger problems. I came in here to try and warn her. You. Whatever that the fight's been fixed. August wants a death in the games, and he's planning to take you out with a poisoned needle and a blowgun. The old poison needle, hey.
For a moment, she looked like she was considering it, but then her eyes hardened, and the dragon tear faded to a darker shade of yellow.
That the best you can come up with? I'm not too bright, Baba, but I ain't dumb. More to the point, I thought better of you. Do you have something about going up against a pal of yours? Or do you just not want to get your ass kicked by a girl? Because if it's that, I'll give you a preview to get you used to the concept.
Wait, Ryu started to yell, but got no further before her fist connected with his jaw, spinning him around. As he reeled, her other fist connected almost immediately, slamming him against the door. The third blow was a kick, and his last thought as darkness crashed down like gravity was that he was pretty sure it had put him through the door. This impression was confirmed when he woke up, soaking wet and on his back. He was lying in one of the ornamental fountains, and Rand was standing over him. It looked like he had been slapping him to his senses.
Awake now?
The big man asked, chuckling.
Man, what did you do? What did I do?
Ryu growled, sitting up.
What the hell did you two think you were doing, hey? Easy.
Rand helped him to his feet forcefully and began steering him towards the locker room on the right.
In here, champ. Let's have a quick chat. We've got time.
The room was much smaller and shabbier than Kat's had been, but it did have a couple benches. Baba's axe was in a corner. Rand had probably brought it in before waking him up. Once they were both sitting and the candle was lit, Rand continued.
Look, we didn't know how serious this was at first, okay? It was just a prank. A gag. We couldn't resist. When you told us about why you were here, I kind of wanted to own up, but Kat said no way. She really wants to go up against you. I think it means she likes you, actually. Did.
Ryu made a face.
Did like me. I wouldn't be too sure about that.
Rand laughed again.
Girl like that, a fist and a kiss might not be too far off. We can talk about our emotions and shit some other time, man,
Ryu said.
We've got bigger problems than that.
He quickly told Rand about August's plot.
A poison needle.
Rand scoffed when he was done.
Come on, don't be an idiot. He was just bluffing. Trying to sell you a story because he thought you were a wimp or something. You know August better than I do,
Ryu told him.
Do you think he's the kind of guy to bluff about something like this? Well.
Rand thought about it. After a moment, he shook his head.
No. He's not. I wouldn't think he was the kind of man who would do something like this, but if he really told you that, he wouldn't bluff. He did really say that, right? Saint Eva damn it all, what do I have to do?
Ryu yelled, suddenly enraged.
Take you down to the freaking church and swear a solemn oath in front of the priest? Because I'll damn well do it, if that's what it takes. This is her life we're talking about here. All right,
Rand said quietly after a moment more.
I believe you. Shit. This is a real mess.
He stroked his chin for a moment, thinking about it.
All right, I've got a plan. Can you spot me some cash? Sure.
Ryu looked around, and quickly spotted a bag of coins lying in a corner.
Here, this is August's bribe for putting up with his crap. We'll use it to spike his wheel, then.
Rand smiled grimly.
Perfect. Here's what I'm thinking. We've still got an hour until showtime. I'll see if I can find out what exactly that poison is, then sneak out the back door and go have an apothecary fix me up with some antidotes. I hand one over to her, and one to you. If you can both dodge the needle, that's fine, but if you don't, you'll both have some insurance. That'll mean talking her into believing my story,
Ryu reminded him.
I didn't have too much luck with that. I'll try to be more eloquent,
Rand promised, standing up.
Be back in a little bit. Let's hope this works. Demonstrate,
Ryu agreed. The minutes dragged on like hours after his friend had left. Ryu paced around, then spot-checked his armor, as well as his sword. Still, nothing happened, and he went back to simply staring at the wall, waiting and waiting. As the night dragged on, oddly enough, he could almost feel the sun setting, even though he couldn't even see it. It was a decidedly odd sensation, and it seemed coupled with the growing noise level he was hearing as the crowds piled in. It was Sunday night, there was blood in the air, and somehow Ryu knew that by dawn, nothing would be the same anymore. In the end, what alerted him to Rand's return was not his presence in his room, but the adjoining one. He heard their voices, quiet at first, although cats quickly grew louder. The sounds of more violence, of course, were unmistakable, and he winced sympathetically when Rand staggered in, clutching his head.
Why'd you have to go and do that, hey?
The farm clansman muttered.
I might have been able to sell her on it if you hadn't pissed her off first. She gave me this to, and I quote, teach me not to be such a gullible moron. That girl's as ferocious as a biruburu when her blood's up. I noticed,
Ryu commented dryly.
I doubt she'd appreciate that comparison, though. I wasn't planning on sharing it with her.
Rand held out a couple cloth-wrapped bundles.
Here are the antidotes, then. Jean told me what poison it was. Seriously bad stuff. Ran me 100 zeni each, but that was okay.
He tossed the purse back to Ryu as well.
There was 1,000 in there, man. August knows how to bribe a guy.
Ryu tucked it under his belt, then pocketed the antidotes as well.
So if I get shot, I take this. What if she gets nailed? Make sure that doesn't happen.
Rand shook his head.
You can try and force-feed it to her if you need to, but that might not work. It's best if nobody gets hit. If they really are aiming for her, you'll need to shield her with your body, then take the antidote, but... She's not going to take that sitting down.
Ryu stood up.
I'll have to actually beat her. Think you can?
Rand asked bluntly.
Round 1 didn't go too well. I wasn't fighting back.
Ryu put a hand on his sword.
If I lose, she dies. I'll win. I have to. No way around it. That's the spirit.
Rand clapped a hand as large as his head on his shoulder.
I'll see if I can spot the shooter. Good luck out there. Keep her alive. And when this is all done with...
The light from the candle in the room reflected off of his eyes.
The three of us will go have a little talk with August Conti. Demonstrate.
Ryu smiled nastily.
Might want to leave. I don't think you want to be in here when they come for me. Thanks, man. Just pull this off,
Rand said as he left.
That's all the thanks I need. Mr. Dury.
A guard opened the back door only seconds later.
You're on. Thanks, man.
Ryu stood up, strapped Baba's axe to his back, and walked past him into a long, dingy back hall. The door closed behind him, cutting off all light save from the other end. As he continued down it, the noise level slowly grew louder, as did the light emanating from the portal before him. He walked through it, and out into the arena, without fear. It was time. The arena was simply designed. 12-foot stone walls with metal spikes topping them surrounded it, cutting off any hope of escape. Ryu stood on a wooden floor, split down the middle by a water-filled moat, with a single log bridging the gap. Above, roaring onlookers filled the stands, 4 guard towers looming over them. Magical spotlights shone down from those, creating bubbles of illumination that circled the arena. Ryu's eyes tracked up, above Kat's door, to an enclosed private seat. There, August stared down at him, eyes burning.
And here he is, ladies and gentlemen.
The man he had seen outside the front on his first day in the obnoxious lime-green doublet was yelling, voice enhanced by more magic, hanging by one arm from a rope that floated in the air far above. He clearly had guts, if not fashion sense.
The wild man from the woods, the lunatic lumberjack. Baba. Tari.
Two of the lights zoomed in on Ryu, as the crowd began to cheer and jeer, mostly the latter.
Hey, Baba. Your ass is dead. Lumberjack ass. What the hell kind of a name is Baba? Go back to rolling logs. And over here.
The man continued, as the other two lights zipped over to the opposite side of the arena.
The little cat girl that could, the feline firebrand. Cat. Chan.
She entered just as he said her name, wearing the leotard now, carrying her staff over her shoulder. The crowd erupted again, even louder than before.
Marry me, Cat. Go, Cat. Eat him alive. We love you, girl. Nice ass, baby. Ladies and gentlemen.
August stood up and began what would probably be a fairly lengthy oration.
Welcome to the Corsair Coliseum, and welcome to the main event on this night of fighting. And now, who here is ready for some carnage?
The crowd roared its approval, and he spread his hands.
As I thought. Fortunately for all of us, violence is our specialty here at the Coliseum.
As he continued to ramble on, Ryu inclined his head towards the log, then walked forward. Eyes curious, Kat did the same.
Applause seems a little one-sided, doesn't it?
Ryu said quietly as they met in the center.
What a load of shit. You're telling me,
Kat agreed, rolling her eyes.
Assholes, the lot of them. If I wanted to be drooled over, I'd have gone into modeling for statues.
She glanced up at the announcer.
I'm gonna have to kick Enrique's ass, too. I've told him not to call me a cat girl.
Turning her eyes back to him, she shot him a grin.
Ready to do this, tough guy? More than.
Ryu smiled as well, then decided to try it one more time, hardened by her mood. Up above them, August was still going on, but he wasn't listening, and it didn't look like she was, either.
Listen, Cat. I know you don't believe me about the poison needle, but will you just take one of these antidotes, just to be on the safe side? I've got two, right here. If I am full of it, no harm done, but if I'm not... You just won't let up, will you?
Kat shook her head in wonder.
Trying to psyche me out like this. It's not gonna work, Ryu, so just cut it out, will you?
She smiled again, sharp and vicious.
What gets me is that you don't even need it. But you just keep trying to play dirty. Boy, did I ever misjudge you. Don't get me wrong, a little bit nasty just makes things interesting. I'm no Girl Scout either. But you? It's like it's all you know. What would you suggest, then?
Ryu shot a glance at his dragon tear, and was slightly surprised. Instead of fading further, it had reverted to its original shade of yellow. Above them, heavy drums were beating regularly now, accompanying August's speech.
Look around you.
Kat spread her arms dramatically.
Look where we are, and what's happening around us. It's fight night, and we're it. 8,000 eyes are on the two of us, and they all want one thing. One hell of a fight. And funny thing is, that's what I want too.
Her smile widened, and her eyes glinted.
Beating up wimps is no fun. Getting stomped is just as bad. The thrill is when it's good. When both of us give it our all, put everything we have into it, and the only thing left to do is see who's better. You get it, Ryu? I know you do. Throw everything else away, just for one night, for one fight. And dance with me the dance of blood. Fine.
Ryu gave in, and smiled as well, in a way he rarely allowed himself to do. He did know what she meant. He felt it, just like she did.
You want to dance, girl? You've got one. If you won't listen to me, I'll just have to pound you into the ground, and ram that antidote down your throat the hard way. And you know what? I can go with that. But if I'm going to get into that mood, it had better not be easy for me. I don't do this very often, so I'm counting on you to make this worth it. Don't disappoint me, Cat. Same to you, Ryu.
Her eyes were like fire, green and wild.
Now you're talking. I knew you had it in you. You should do it more often, you know. It's the only real way to feel alive. Now hurry up and ditch that dead weight on your back, and let's go. I've been looking forward to this for far too long already.
She lowered her staff, planting one end between them.
That works for me.
Ryu shouldered the axe off, letting it fall to the ground behind him on the edge of the moat, and drew his sword, holding it at his side confidently.
Sounds like August is almost done up there. It's time. Ready. Bring it,
she whispered, stepping slowly back off the log, without taking her eyes off of him. Still watching her carefully as well, Ryu did the same, retreating step by step. Apparently noticing this, August finally stopped his tirade for a moment, and the heckling of the spectators gradually died down, along with the drums.
Brave warriors!
The master of Corsair shouted once there was absolute silence, and they both stood as far away as possible, backs to the gates that had been lowered behind them to trap them inside.
The time for combat has come. Now prepare yourselves, and may the best fighter triumph. 3, 2, 1. Go.
In the instant that the last word left August's mouth, Kat was in motion, running forward. As Ryu watched, eyes wide, she drove her staff into the ground, launching herself into the air over the moat. For a moment, he thought it a stupid, showy move that would leave her wide open when she landed, but then he realized she wasn't merely jumping. Kat was spinning, forward momentum continuing vertically, and her staff was bearing all of that force with it. He barely managed to get out of the way in time. The impact when she landed practically created a shockwave, and her staff smashed a hole through the wood, spraying shrapnel in all directions as the crowd roared its approval. Kat herself was unharmed, landing on her feet with a cocky grin, her knees bent to absorb the impact. That still left her open, and Ryu was there, striking at her side. His sword slashed through her leotard at the waist, but struck off the steel belt she wore under it. He had been expecting that, the antique bronze sword never would have been able to penetrate. It would still hurt, though, and possibly even dent. Even if it didn't, the bruises would take their toll. The wince she displayed for a moment told that much had been accomplished. She swept her staff at his feet then, but he managed to jump it and strike again, this time at her shoulder. She raised her arm, forcing his sword away with her bracer, and he frowned. Her boasts of inhuman strength clearly weren't exaggerations. Still, she was in his range, and they both knew it. Judging by their mixed response, so did the crowd. Her solution to the problem was to choke up on her staff and jab at his stomach using both arms, forcing him back and to the side to avoid being neatly spitted. Her next move surprised him. She waited back in close, and then before he could attack, hit him with the same combo that she had used when she had caught him in her room. He was familiar with it now, though, and ducked the first punch. The second hit, but he turned his head with it, absorbing some of the force, and stayed on his feet as she went for the kick. Catching her leg, he whirled and threw her towards the moat. He didn't actually expect her to fall in, though, and wasn't disappointed. She slammed into the side of the gorge with a grunt, but got her hands on the edge, and flipped up, landing on her feet again. Turning around, she regarded him, staff held in one hand.
Well,
she taunted, bending over and making a face, tail lashing behind her.
Come on and make my night. Gladly.
Ryu yelled back with a grin. He stepped onto the log and made a beckoning gesture with his hand, and with a smirk of her own, she jumped on as well, though staying out of range of his sword. Immediately, she lashed out with a horizontal swipe, clearly trying to knock him off. Ryu was expecting that, though, and dived forward onto his stomach, under the attack. Ignoring the crowd's booing, without even regaining his footing, he lashed out at her legs with his sword, finally drawing visible blood. This victory was short-lived, though. Even as she scrambled to regain her balance, she shifted her grip and swung again, her staff hammering into his back. This turned out to be a mistake on her part. Bouncing, Ryu's forward momentum carried him into her, and they both tumbled over the side. As they fell into the moat, Ryu somehow managed to plunge his sword into the log's side. The crowd was silent for the moment, not sure what to make of this unexpected turn of events. They hung there, Kat clinging to Ryu's back for a few long moments, and then she clambered up onto the log. Turning back, she grabbed his hand, pulling his sword from the log as she flipped him over her head, slamming him into the floor on his side of the arena.
Thanks,
he grunted, standing back up, as the crowd exploded in approval, cheering them both for the first time.
No charge.
She snickered, taking up a ready stance again.
That would have been a sucky way to beat you. Now come on, big boy. You want to talk, or fight? Heh.
Ryu didn't dignify that with more of a verbal response than a quick chuckle, but instead ran forward, leaping onto the log and then off of it towards her. Kat watched his approach curiously, the tip of her tail twitching while the rest of her remained absolutely motionless, until he jumped into the air before her, at which point she naturally lashed out with her staff, intending to smack him out of the sky. He swung his sword as soon as she moved, and not at her, though the weapon smashed into his ribs. His blade still came down on it, and sliced a good foot off of the end. Ryu hit the ground, hard, but the damage had been done.
You.
Cat stared at her weapon, then back at him, and then she moved again, reversing her grip and swinging the other end at his head as the crowd gasped in shock. Due to its altered length, though, the swing was awkward, and Ryu was able to roll out of the way as he came to his feet. Before he could attack himself, though, she was moving in again, grabbing his head in one hand and forcing it down. Deflecting his counterattack with the bracer on her other arm, she flipped back and kicked him in the face, sending him flying over the trench to sprawl across the ground on the other side. It took a phenomenal amount of effort just to stay conscious, let alone keep moving, but somewhere in the back of Ryu's mind, he knew that August didn't actually care about who lived, as long as anybody died, it would be good enough for him. If he looked like he was down, he would be hit by the poison dart, and he hadn't taken the antidote yet. The arena spinning around him, the crowd's now indiscriminate shouting filling his ears, he sat up and turned his head to see Cat watching him from the other side, keeping her anger under control with visible effort.
Still up?
She called over.
You've got stamina, I'll give you that much.
Despite her taunts, she was breathing heavily, and her stance was unsteady, she was clearly running down.
Gee, thanks.
Staring at her, Ryu slowly realized the way to win. Rising to his feet, he sheathed his sword, and picked up Baba's dropped axe instead. Before she could realize what he was doing, he brought it down on the log bridge, chopping it in two. The weight of the axe pulled it into the moat along with the pieces, and he let it go with a muttered oath before standing back and meeting Cat's eyes.
Come and get me. If you can. Playing hard to get.
She shot back.
I can do it that way.
Running forward, she launched herself over the moat like she had at the opening of the fight, spinning in the air and striking down with the same massive force. She had forgotten her wounded legs, though, and she botched the landing, falling forward onto her face. Ryu had avoided her attack again, and as she fell, he moved in, bringing the flat of his sword down against the back of her head. Even that didn't quite do it, he saw her struggling to rise, and hit her again.
Here it comes.
Ran shouted then, his deep voice audible even above the crowd's mixed response, and Ryu knew what it meant. Frantically groping for an antidote, he pulled one of the bundles from his pocket, pulled it open and shoved the entire thing into his mouth even as he threw himself over Cat. He felt pricks of pain, still sharp despite his wooziness, moments later, and had to chuckle despite everything. He was in no shape to count, but there had to be at least a half dozen.
What's so funny?
Cat muttered, losing consciousness as well by the fading sound of her voice.
And what the hell are you doing, anyway? Better not be getting any funny idea, climbing all over me like this. Paladin named Ray,
Ryu tried to say with a mouth full of cloth, even as he struggled to force the antidote down.
Staying at the same end as me. Said he'd help me out. Get me there if this doesn't work.
And then the light faded from his eyes, and the arena vanished around him, the howling voices trailing off into nothingness. More. We need more power. God needs more power. Give yourself to our God. Pray to God. Praise God. Sacrifice your body and soul to God. You are destined to become God's power. Even in unconsciousness, Ryu couldn't escape the demon's voice in his nightmares, or the eye that watched his every move. When it faded, he knew he was awake again, but it was slow, and his eyes refused to open. As feeling slowly, gradually returned to his body, he realized he was in a bed, and that he was not alone. He could hear voices, and familiar ones.
I don't even know what I'm going to say when he wakes up.
Cat was complaining.
I mean, sorry doesn't seem to cut it. And I'm not the kind of girl who goes all, thanks for saving my life, either, you know. I believe I know what you mean, yes,
Ray replied, sounding slightly awkward.
Perhaps he will as well. I'd suggest just talking to him like you normally would. That's the problem.
Cat explained.
I've never had something like this happen to me before. That's why I don't. Hey. His breathing's changed.
Ryu felt her hands on his shoulders, and then he was shaken roughly. His eyes finally opened, and he saw her face above him, staring down in concern. Still halfway out, he was struck by the bizarre thought that sad emotions didn't really suit her face.
You've got good ears,
he managed to say.
So. Believe me now. What?
She blinked, then punched him in the shoulder, but smiled despite herself.
Ass. You've got to be feeling better, if you're giving me grief already. That's no reason to injure him again immediately,
Ray advised her, walking over to look at Ryu as well.
That would rather defeat the point of bringing him to me in the first place. He's made of tougher stuff than that.
Cat brushed that off.
Besides, you could just zap him back like you did to us already if I did, right? You sure know your stuff, buddy. My supply of white magic is hardly inexhaustible,
Ray informed her dryly, but the faint hints of a smile were playing around the edges of his mouth.
I brought Kay over here for a reason, you know. At any rate, welcome back, Ryu. You've had quite an evening, haven't you? I told you, didn't I?
Ryu sat up, surprised by how well he was feeling. Now that his grogginess was fading, he was noticing quickly that he couldn't feel any of the injuries Kat had given him.
She fill you in on what happened? She did.
Ray nodded slowly.
I was expecting something interesting, but seeing a beaten-up Warren clanswoman standing at my door carrying you over her shoulders wasn't quite what I had in mind. You do know how to liven up an evening, both of you. We keep things interesting,
Kat joked.
Maybe a little too interesting this time around. I'll drink to that,
Ryu agreed.
I'm completely cured, then.
He paused.
And who's Kay? A friend of mine, and a brilliant doctor,
Ray explained.
When Miss Chan brought you to me and explained the situation, I asked for her assistance, and she gladly complied. The antidote your other friend provided remedied most of the poison, and Kay was able to easily purify the last traces from your system. I followed that up with some healing magic for your injuries. You're in perfect health. Thanks, then,
Ryu said, smiling.
Looks like I owe you one, and your friend too.
Now that he could see her clearly, Kat was healed as well, though she still wore her torn leotard. She was sitting in a chair now. Ray's room had several as well as a table, unlike Ryu's own cheap quarters.
A big one,
she agreed.
We both do. I hate to ask for this after everything else, especially since this is your room and all. But could you give us a moment? Of course.
Ray stood up and headed for the exit.
I'll be outside. What's up?
Ryu asked as the paladin closed the door behind him, swinging his legs out of the bed so he could sit on the edge. They had taken his armor off, but he otherwise remained fully clothed, thankfully.
It's like this.
Kat shook her head.
Look, Ryu. I'm kind of shitty with words sometimes, but I really screwed up back there. I should have known you were a good guy, that you were telling the truth. It's just.
She bit her lip.
The kind of life I've had. You don't really meet many guys who do things like you did. Most of the ones I've known would have just let me take the hit, if the money was good. You haven't known the right ones, is all,
Ryu told her seriously.
Me and my partner. We're no angels. But we don't do shit we don't like. And I don't like that kind of business one bit. Ran's a good guy, too. And Ray. Yeah.
Kat smiled again, but it looked forced.
Look at me, up to my ass in nice guys. I don't know how to deal with that. Crazy, the lot of you. Hey, I did beat the crap out of you,
Ryu reminded her.
I don't think that's exactly got nice guy written all over it. Oh, please.
She rolled her eyes.
You were the one who went out like a light, little boy blue. I got back up, and that netted me the win. Only because I took that poison needle for you, fur face,
Ryu bantered easily.
I had you beat. Don't go bringing technicalities into this. You know better than that. I was still in that fight,
Kat argued.
I'd have gotten back up. My head's pretty damn hard, you know. Boy, I'll say,
Ryu cracked. When she just stared blankly at him, he sighed.
Alright, let's call it a draw, then. Extenuating circumstances. Yeah, okay,
she conceded, then smiled, eyes glittering.
One of these days, maybe we'll settle it. The right way, this time. Had fun, did you?
Ryu asked, smiling as well.
Of course.
She scooted closer.
So did you. What I don't get is why you're so reluctant to let that part of you out. If it makes you feel good, why hide it? It's not really something I'm proud of,
Ryu explained, looking away.
Whenever I used to give into it, people would get hurt. Sometimes badly. You know how people react when a 10-year-old kid breaks a grown man's legs. How about a 6-year-old girl?
Kat replied sardonically, staring at a wall as well.
No matter how bad he was asking for it. Yeah, it kind of bothered me at first, too. But then I figured out I didn't really care all that much what anybody but myself thought. So I just learned how to live with it. It's who I am. Maybe I would have done the same, if I had been alone,
Ryu admitted.
But my partner and I. It wasn't fair to make him have to put up with shit just because I couldn't control myself. Guess that's why I learned how to keep it hidden. That'd do it, alright.
She turned back to him.
You've been together a long time, hey? You and this partner of yours. Two lost boys against the world,
Ryu said with a slight smile, looking back at her as well.
No family, no home, nothing to keep us alive but each other. When it's all you've got, it means a lot to you. It's got to.
Kat slowly nodded.
Alright. I've got it. That's how I'll pay you back for this. I'll help you track down this thief of yours.
She smirked mischievously.
That is, unless you still think I did it. Nay,
Ryu drawled.
She wasn't nearly as cute as you. First you slice me up, then you tell me I'm cute.
She winked.
You sure know how to treat a girl. What can I say?
Ryu spread his arms, mock helplessly.
I'm just a classy kind of guy, Sure you are.
She shoved him lightly.
And I'm a well-mannered lady, with a fancy dress and everything. Maybe even a hat. And shit, gloves, while we're at it. Maybe even a friggin' parasol.
She was still smirking, but there was something else in her eyes.
You don't mind, then? If I tag along, I mean. Why the hell would I?
Ryu told her, keeping his own voice deliberately casual.
We're friends, aren't we? As a matter of fact, once we're done with that, I might even have an offer you would be interested in. Knowing you, I just might be,
she agreed, the smile leaving her face.
But before that, we still have business here to take care of.
Her eyes were dangerous now, a violence in them that held no trace of pleasure.
Demonstrate.
Ryu stood up and began to put his armor back on, face grim.
You and me have all sorts of business with August Conti. Rand was saying something about that, too. Seen him since the fight? Nope.
She frowned.
Hope that doesn't mean he got started without us. Rand's a considerate guy,
Ryu reminded her.
When you get right down to it, he's a better person than either of us. I'm sure he'll save us a piece, even if he did.
Belting his sword back on, he glanced at her staff.
Hey, you got it fixed. Backup staff,
she explained.
I've only got the one, though, so don't go breaking this one too, alright? Deal.
Gathering his armor, Ryu quickly put it all back on, then inclined his head towards the door.
Shall we? Hell yes.
The two of them left the room, only to find Ray leaning against the wall outside, waiting for them. He had found the helmet for his armor somewhere and put it on, giving him a decidedly grim appearance.
Going somewhere?
The paladin asked dryly.
We need to talk with August Conti about how he runs the place,
Kat replied in the same tone of voice.
What a coincidence.
Ray turned slightly, and they saw that his hand was on the sword at his waist.
I have matters of my own that I need to discuss with that same individual. It seems that he has strayed from Saint Eva's path more than a little. As a servant of Saint Eva, it is my duty to correct that lapse, by any means necessary. Shall we pay a visit to him together? The more the merrier.
Ryu inclined his head. With the paladin at his left and the fighting girl at his right, he left the inn, the man behind the desk averting his eyes and asking no questions. The pedestrians in the street apparently felt the same way, seeing the three of them, and the looks on their faces, every one of them melted out of their way without a word. Even a brawl that spilled out into the street from a nearby bar slowly stopped as the participants looked up, saw them waiting silently, and quietly stopped fighting, got back up and left.
Whoa,
Eddie the guard said when they walked up to the Colosseum's gate.
Kat and Baba? Damn, you got better fast. Thanks Saint Eva, and his hiring policy.
Ryu thumbed at Ray, who didn't comment.
Mind letting us in? We need to talk with your boss. I don't really know if I should be doing that, guys,
Eddie replied, hesitating.
But I don't know if I like what happened out there either.
He looked away.
Word's getting around. It wasn't any of us who did that, you know. August brought in some hired pros. Jean was the only one who knew, and she didn't like it either. That's why she started talking after Rand leaned on her a little.
He looked over at Ray.
The church knows, right? How big is this going to be? So long as you had no knowledge of events prior to their occurrence, no blame is yours, my son,
Ray told him.
However, my presence here is in furtherance of Saint Eva's will. Denying us would force me to report to my superiors for further instruction. That won't be necessary.
Eddie raised the gate.
Rand's already back there. Nobody tried to stop him. They ain't gonna stop you.
He gave them a serious look.
Town guard gets involved, none of us saw anything. But we ain't gonna stand in their way, neither. We weren't going to ask you to,
Ryu said, nodding.
Just stay out of the way. That's good enough for us.
They walked past him and headed towards August's office, and though more guards were stationed in the halls, none tried to stop them. Jean was still behind her desk. When they walked past her, she looked away, remaining silent. The door was slightly ajar, and they heard Rand's voice from behind it. Opening it, they walked inside.
But they'll be here soon, and they're not going to be happy,
Rand was telling August. The big man had what looked like knuckle guards on his massive fists and a bowl-like bronze helmet on his head, and he loomed over the older man in an unmistakably threatening mood. August, for his part, was sitting in front of the fireplace, just as he had when Ryu had met with him the other day. His eyes were still on the roaring flames, and he showed no signs of hearing Rand's words.
A little late for that, Chief,
Ryu told him as they walked in, standing to their left.
We appreciate doing the decent thing, though. Means we don't have to, so much. It was worth a shot.
Rand glanced over to them. His eyes widened in surprise upon seeing Ray, then narrowed, and he walked over to stand next to Kat.
He doesn't seem to be paying much attention, though. Well, we'll just have to do something about that, won't we?
Kat cracked her knuckles.
I don't appreciate people trying to kill me, August. Are all the actors in place, then?
The older man asked suddenly, and despite the softness of his voice, something in it froze them all to the spot. He stood, slowly, and turned to face them, the fireplace's light casting him in darkness from behind.
It seems none of you cared for my script. Criticism is such an ugly thing.
One eye looked straight ahead at all of them, while the other flickered over to Ray.
But it seems there's an extra on the stage. The false fighter, the champion firebrand, and the honest worker I expected, but my friend from Evray? How interesting. Do you have a role to play in this as well, Ray? Enough of your wordplay,
the paladin told him firmly.
I've heard everything, and I am most displeased. Such behavior from such a devoted servant of Saint Eva is something I cannot forgive, and neither can our God. Explain yourself, August. An explanation.
August spread his hands.
Why, Mr. Braddock. If that's all you wanted, you could have asked me of it when we first met, a week ago.
He bared his teeth in a vicious sneer.
I would have told you all about the marvelous performance of death and despair I was crafting for our friends here, even then. So you've been planning on killing me off all week?
Kat demanded.
Or was it even longer? Were you just waiting for me to get popular enough that it'd be worth your while? Oh, no.
August shook his head.
It was only when Mr. Battison here became involved that I decided to up the stakes. Yes, I know your true name. I've known it ever since you came to my city. We've been watching you all for some time. Yes, quite some time indeed.
He met Ryu's eyes then, his own burning with a dreadful fire that had nothing to do with the one behind him.
Lord Baruberi sends his regards. Ryu?
Rand asked, puzzled.
Am I supposed to recognize the name?
Ryu replied, fighting a chill.
You're babbling, old man. And you're not improving our mood. Am I?
August asked softly.
Such a waste, then. I work so hard to set the mood. If honesty is what you desire, then honesty you shall have.
And then his head split down the middle, a vertical gash opening it from crown to chin, forcing the halves apart like a fruit.
What the hell?
Kat spat, then froze, eyes wide in horror, as the two halves of his head continued to speak.
An explanation, you say?
August growled, voice deepening, as his transformation continued. His body shifted, then bulged with muscles, the older man's wiry frame expanding into one that only came second to Rand's, his rich blue clothing splitting at the seams in several places. Thick brown fur sprouted like grass, covering every inch of him, as he stretched up to at least 7 feet of height.
We make you fight each other, here in this grand arena, but that is not enough. Were you to kill each other, to murder at the whim of the crowd, your love of bloodshed would increase tenfold. And all of that negative emotion would become the strength of our God. Namanda, Namanda.
Rand muttered, awestruck.
What sort of monster is he? No monster at all,
Ray whispered, just as stunned.
There is another word for one such as he, who has sold his soul to the void. Demon. Bullshit. Demons aren't real.
Kat protested, but it sounded feeble as they watched their enemy's horrific transformation continue. His head was the worst of it, the two halves of his skull were reforming now, their missing portions of bone and muscle and blood and flesh regenerating individually in turn. Only when each was complete did they shift to match the rest of his body, becoming the snarling visages of a bear.
Demons are very real, feral child,
the two-headed monstrosity August had become corrected her, both mouths speaking in unison.
And though I have failed in my attempt to change your fates and ensure our success, I retain the power I received in exchange for my soul. My life may be forfeit for my disgrace, but I will not go into the abyss alone. I shall offer your souls up to our God as my coin.
From over the fireplace, he pulled down what had looked like decoration, two brutal stone clubs, primitive but deadly.
My only regret is that we could not make a public show of it. Oh, to be able to kill you in style. Spread out.
Ryu yelled.
Don't make it easy for him to nail us. Keep him moving.
The others did as he had said, circling around.
Let me take the lead.
Ray told them, drawing his sword.
I can take hits better than any of you. Oh, hell no.
Cat yelled, dashing in.
This piece of shit's mine.
One of the huge clubs swung down from overhead towards her, but she darted to the side, swung her body around the arm, and continued that momentum to bring her staff against the right head's jaw.
Ha!
August chortled, grinning back at her.
That's smarts, girly.
Before she could pull back, his other arm lashed out, smashing the club into her ribs in an underhand swing. The blow flung her through the air, into the far wall. August's triumph was short-lived, however. Ryu had moved in from his other side, and slashed under the raised arm. Roaring, August hit him as well, knocking him into the fireplace.
Shit!
Rand cursed, advancing from behind the demon. As August turned, he lashed out with his fists, smashing the back of one head into another with a powerful punch. Before he could deliver another punch, though, a club returned the favor, sending him sprawling on the floor. He loomed over Rand, the other club raised.
One down.
August growled, then roared in pain as Ray's longsword cut deeply into his side. Whirling with far more speed than his massive frame should have allowed, he laid into the paladin with repeated blows, knocking him to his knees.
Over here, tough guy.
Ryu yelled, scrambling out of the fireplace and ignoring the flames that he had been knocked into. There was pain, but he had grown accustomed to pain. He could scream about it later. For now, there were more important things. Namely, attacking August once again, but not with his sword. Gritting his teeth, he shoved his hand into the ashes. Whimpering, he still forced it up, and hurled the embers full into August's faces. Howling, the demon fell back, pawing at its eyes.
Get away from him, people. Quick. That's our line.
Rand yelled, pulling himself to his feet. Still, he and Ray did as he had said, dashing over to where Kat was pulling herself from the wall as Ryu did the same.
You two need to be less reckless.
He began chanting under his breath, and healing magic covered Kat. A moment later, Ryu received the same treatment, and he turned to stare at Ray.
Was that you? What kind of paladin would I be if I didn't know white magic?
Ray replied.
I'm not quite as good at black magic, though. You. Same.
Rand slowly nodded.
I know thunder. That's about it. You'll probably do better with that than close combat,
Ryu pointed out.
He's too fast. Much more than anybody his size should be. And just as strong as you are, too. We're not going to be able to bring him down just going after him individually like we've been trying. He's more than any of us can handle one-on-one. Teamwork, then.
Ray glanced at the roaring demon, who was glaring at them with one head as he pawed at the other.
We had better figure out what we're doing, fast. It looks like he's almost ready to come at us again. Let me go in,
Kat said, then held up a hand.
Don't worry, I'm not gonna try and take him out again. One hit like that was enough to get the point through even my skull. I'm the fastest. If I focus on just keeping him busy and dodging his moves, I'll be fine. Ray, that armor slows you down too much to keep up with him, and Rand. I'm just too slow, period.
He smiled tightly.
I know. Soften him up with your black magic, then,
Ryu continued, picking up where she had left off.
I'll circle him and wait for an opening. Here, then.
Ray handed him his sword.
Take this. It's better than yours.
The blade was the same length and style as Ryu's, but it was made of good steel rather than bronze.
Put it to good use, my friend. I will,
Ryu promised, handing over his.
Here. In case you need to go in after all. Chattering like school children at a time like this.
August bellowed, and they all turned their heads to see him charging.
Foolishness!
One club came down, and they scattered.
Missed me.
Cat brought her staff down on the demon's wrist, then leaped back, dodging his other club.
Missed me again. Come on, asshole. Over here. Naya Naya.
Taunting him, she bobbed and weaved, leading him on a merry chase around the room.
Now.
Ray held up one hand, and bolts of electricity appeared, lashing August like a whip. Roaring, the beast buckled under the assault, freezing. A second spell from Rand drove him to his knees, one of which Cat promptly crushed.
Ryu.
She called out.
Right.
Moving in, Ryu was prepared for the club when it swung out, and managed to duck under it. Before the other could strike as well, he struck out with both hands, bringing the paladin's sword into the left head's neck with all of his strength. Blood and worse sprayed, showering them all, as the head nearly flew off, only the demon's massive, forked spinal column had stopped the blade. His throat was completely carved through. That had come at a price, though. The sword was stuck, and Ryu's efforts to pull it out left him open to a club.
Shithead!
Cat snarled, dodging another swing from the other club. Before August could bring the one he had hit Ryu with to bear on either of them again, she lashed out at the broken knee once more, and August crumpled, roaring.
You okay? I'm fine.
Ryu winced, left arm hanging limply, it felt dislocated. Still he stood, unarmed but still in the fight.
Let's finish this. Ryu.
Ray called, and the bronze blade came flying through the air. Catching it in his good hand, Ryu nodded to Cat, and the two of them moved in together. The first club was aimed at her, and the second at him. The first was evaded, and the second deflected with the bronze sword. Sword and staff lashed out, and August screamed as his jaw shattered and one eye was crushed.
You're finished,
Ray told him quietly as he and Rand advanced once more.
Now speak, demon. Tell us more of this god you spoke of, and of your purpose in this city. The purpose for which the legions of infinity bought your soul. Ha!
August laughed, slowly and painfully, as they stood around him. Despite all of his injuries, both heads still spoke together, the biological improbability of this apparently irrelevant.
Fools, the lot of you. I have already told you, my life is forfeit for failing. By now, I'm sure my masters have discovered what I have done. Failing in my mission would be worthy of punishment enough, but attempting to slay those who we have waited 1,000 years and more for? And you still think you will have time to interrogate me? That I will live long enough? My time has come.
And then, before their stunned eyes, he burst into jet black flame.
Saint Eva!
Cat whispered, all four of them backing away in horror as August forced himself to his feet one last time, even as the flames consumed him.
You wish to know of my purpose?
The demon bellowed.
Then I shall tell you one thing, as your reward for triumph. Enjoy your time while you still have it, for your triumph today shall turn to despair tomorrow. God's time is at hand.
Laughing insanely, the two-headed demon vanished into the dark flames and was gone, leaving nothing but smoke and ashes.
What the hell was that all about?
Cat asked once the fire had burnt itself out completely.
A tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing.
Rand sighed.
I wish. But we're not that lucky. He was insane, but he wasn't just rambling. Why us, though?
Ryu demanded angrily.
We're nobody special. Just a bunch of castaways. Aren't we? The legions of infinity have access to sources of information beyond the grasp of mortal men,
Ray murmured, clearly disturbed.
Perhaps one or more of you is destined for greatness. And August sought to turn that destiny to evil. If demons are abroad in the land, then this is a much greater problem than I had thought.
He shook his head, wandering over to August's desk and beginning to search through his paperwork.
I will have to inform the leaders of the faith in Evray. I assume you would prefer I left your names out of it. It's be appreciated,
Rand agreed.
My people and the Church of Saint Eva don't really see eye to eye. I am aware,
Ray replied absently.
I've been to that part of the world before. Yeah, well.
Rand looked away.
Maybe we shouldn't talk about it. I think we've all had enough trouble already today. I swear to Saint Eva, if you two start going at it now, I'm slamming your heads together,
Cat told them, sinking to the floor.
What a night. It isn't over yet,
Ryu reminded her.
I don't think we'll want to be in town when the guard finds this. Good point.
She made a face.
Very good point. Well, looks like we're out of a job, Rand. You think?
The big man replied dryly.
I talked with Jean for a bit before I came in, and I don't think anybody else who works here will raise a stink. She said she'd send everybody home after you guys came in. I figure we'll have a good 6 hours to get out of town before anybody finds this. That should be plenty. With no corpse, and nobody actually saying we were here, we'll want to stay out of Corsair and lay low for a while to avoid getting brought in for questioning, but they'll drop it eventually, and we won't have a price on our heads. Works for me.
Ryu shook his head.
I was just about done here anyways. Looks like this was a bum lead. Gee, thanks.
Cat snarked.
We're going back to hometown, then? You said there was another lead there, right? Yeah, but let's drop by where my partner's hiding out first,
Ryu decided.
It's this old ruin south of hometown. He's working with another buddy of ours to try and fix it up. You can meet them there, and we can fill them in on what's happening. Heading out together.
Rand guessed.
Why am I not surprised by this? You're coming too, right?
Cat pressed.
Come on, it'll be fun. The more the merrier,
Ryu agreed.
Well, I am out of a job.
Rand shrugged.
Alright, I'm in, but I'll be staying with your buddy at that hideout you mentioned, if that's alright. You two don't stick out too much in a crowd, so you should be fine even if somebody comes looking for you, but I'm about as difficult to pick out of a lineup around this part of the world as a whale in a dress. I'll feel better if I can lie low for a while, just in case. If you're all going the same way, that makes things simpler, then.
Ray looked up from the desk as he stuffed his collection of August paperwork into a bag.
I'll wait a few hours after you leave, then head west, towards Windia. With luck, if anybody does try to come after us, they'll follow me instead of you, then. Thanks, man.
Ryu glanced over.
Anything interesting? Quite a bit.
Ray nodded.
I'll peruse it at my leisure later, but for now, we should probably at least leave the Colosseum. Man's got a point,
Cat agreed, standing up.
Let me just get my stuff out of my room, and I'll be ready to go.
She started to walk past Ray, then paused, turned and offered her hand.
Thanks. For helping us out and all. You weren't really involved in this like we were. It was my duty as a servant of Saint Eva.
Ray shook it.
And, more importantly, I was glad to help my friends. Maybe we're more alike than I thought,
Rand said as he followed Cat out, pausing for a handshake as well.
Good luck out there. The same to you.
The paladin nodded briefly.
We could all probably use some of that.
Ryu was the last one out, and he clapped Ray on the shoulder.
Be careful out there, buddy. Just in case.
He held out the paladin's sword, having retrieved it from August's remains.
Keep it.
Ray held up one hand.
It's not charity, I think you three need to be more careful than I do, to be honest. I wish I could say I thought this was going to end here, but as Mr. Marks said, we're not that lucky. If anybody does come after me, they'll be reluctant to do much to somebody in my position. I'll feel better if you have some decent steel in your hand. Yeah, okay.
Ryu was too tired to argue about it.
Think you can keep us posted on anything else you find about this? If there's anything in August papers that you should know about, or anything else related to this at all that I find, I'll forward it to the Rangers Guild in hometown,
Ray promised.
Thanks.
Ryu smiled wearily.
Hell of a night. Indeed.
Ray turned back to his search.
Until we meet again, then, my friend.
After Cat and Rand had grabbed their few possessions from their rooms, they stopped by the inn to grab Ryu's before drifting out of town through the south gate. As they'd hoped, the Colosseum had been deserted, and nobody bothered them on the streets either. All the same, they wasted no time on the road south, only making camp near the beach once the sun was completely down. Before Ryu could offer to go fishing for dinner, Cat had run off by herself, coming back with a wild boar in only a matter of minutes.
So what, did you just find that thing and kill it with your staff?
Ryu asked, amused, once they'd eaten. They were all relaxing around the campfire, and he was examining his new sword. The few nicks it had were probably from August, since Ray hadn't struck him as the type to be lazy about caring for his blade.
Pretty much.
Cat shrugged, not looking up from her own work. She had taken off her leotard, leaving her in what she had worn to the bar, and was mending the tear Ryu had slashed in it during the fight.
Wish you had told me you knew how to fish first, though. Not that I mind hunting down dinner, but I love fish. It's kind of a shitty rod,
he warned her.
I can't really pull up much with it. A better one's one of the million things I need to get once we've saved up enough money. Know what that's like,
Rand agreed, gazing into the fire.
At least, you've got August bribe money. August bribed you.
Cat shoved Ryu lightly.
And you still wanted to rub him out? Ingrate. I never got a bribe. You got the reward for winning that fight, though, didn't you?
Rand reminded her.
Our boy here never picked up his actual pay. Oh, what, you stopped by to collect your paycheck before hauling me off to Ray?
Ryu teased her back.
Nice to know where your priorities are. Speaking of which, I think that right there's the most feminine thing I've ever seen you do. I am a girl, you know,
she reminded him archly.
You did notice, right? Do I look blind to you?
He replied dryly.
Don't answer that. I'll admit, it took a while for me to learn, she admitted. Delicate stuff isn't usually my thing. Cheaper than hiring somebody else to do it, though, and up until August hired me, I wasn't really rolling in zenny. Still ain't, when you get right down to it.
She examined her leotard judiciously, then set it aside.
Now, then. I, for one, think it's about time you told us what this is all about in a little more detail, if we're going to be in it for the long haul. That's my vote, too,
Rand agreed.
Oh, brother.
Ryu rolled his eyes.
All right, fine. But I'm just warning you, I ain't a professional storyteller or anything.
He thought for a moment, eyes on the fire.
I guess it all started with the crazy old lady.
And then, under the night sky, sitting with his friends around the campfire, he told them his story. An oi to the world and everybody wins.